What do you think will happen if the CGI will finally reach photorealism? If you're interested in video games, animations or computer graphics in general, you might have noticed that YouTube nowadays is full of videos like Skyrim, photorealistic mode, GTA 5 ultra new realistic mode, terms like ray tracing, nanite in Unreal Engine 5 and so on. But let's talk about this. What is photorealism in general? And have we already achieved it? I found this definition on Wikipedia. Photorealism is a genre of art that encompasses painting, drawing, and other graphic media, in which an artist studies a photograph and then attempts to reproduce the image as realistically as possible in another medium. Most of you know, at the beginning, computer graphics looked very simple, like this. Visualizations. We got some simple looking games, but fortunately it didn't end here. Since the origin of CGI, I think there's always been a dream of achieving graphic that would replicate the visuals of our real world in the most believable way. Simply said, it's quite a challenge to make something virtual, physically non-existent, to be indistinguishable from reality. Yearly 3D renders look like crap, right? Compared to today's standards. Just look at all those cool games from 90s.
Sex commandos for world domination. This time I shall reign triumphant.
And early 2000s.
I could be your stick-up man, stick 'em up, stick 'em up!
At that time it was something incredible. Even the concept of playing 3D video game or seeing computer-generated creatures in films. Without a doubt, CGI has made huge progress over the past 20 years. From low-poly characters, which most of them had unrecognizable face, fingers were non-existent, maybe thumb was separated, it's all evolved tremendously. I think really radical improvement was between 2005 to 2008. Just look how real-time rendering changed throughout these 3 years. It was insane. But this is not about video games only. Even animated films had major improvements. During this era, for example, Pixar film Cars implemented fully ray-traced reflections. The film came out in 2006 and it looked stunning. As time passed, the next generation gaming consoles came out. We were seeing major improvements in films, but when it comes to real-time graphic, I think the progress started to slow down a little bit. Textures were more detailed, backgrounds started to look more dense, we were suddenly playing at full HD, but I think there still was a huge gap between real-time and pre-rendered graphics. Well, time has changed. I think most of you already know what came next. Alright, again this is definition from Wikipedia. In 3D computer graphics, ray tracing is a rendering technique for generating an image by tracing the path of light as pixels in an image plane and simulating the effects of its encounters with virtual objects. The technique is capable of producing high degree of visual realism, more so than typical scanline rendering methods, but at a greater computational cost. Simply, the light in 3D environment mimics the behavior of real light. Objects influence each other, reflect, refract, and cast shadows in a much more realistic way. This concept is nothing new, there simply wasn't powerful enough technology in the past, so these days you hear this more often. If CGI can fully reap the benefits of ray tracing, the results may look much more realistic than ever. By the way, the first fully ray-traced animated feature film was The Monsters University. Just compare it with Tangled, for example, which came out in 2010, I think. One of my most favorite Disney films, by the way. If you compare it, you can see the lighting in Monsters looks much more real. Most of new games still don't fully implement the ray tracing, and it's mainly because of performance cost. Even the next generation games use some sort of hybrid render, most of them still use old screen space method with some ray traced features implemented. And I think this is a very smart move. We're getting better looking games, level up graphics, still compatible with older hardware, but it is only a matter of time until performance is no longer an issue, and all games will run at 4K, 8K, fully ray traced with billions of polygons, even on relatively cheap machines. Recently, Unreal Engine 5 showed us that even large scenes with billions of polygons will no longer be an issue. When we finally reach photorealistic renders, there are still some things which must be discussed. By the way, have you heard about uncanny valleys? The concept was identified by the robotics professor Masahiro Mori in 1970. I won't go deep into this topic, you can check it online, but here's what Wikipedia says. again. In aesthetics, the uncanny valley is a hypothesized relationship between the degree of an object's resemblance to a human being and the emotional response to such an object. In a very simple way, the more human-like is a character, the more we sympathize with it and perceive it as a real being. But this works to a certain point. After the character looks almost like a human, brain starts seeing differences and we often find this more weird than believable. Even slight misalignment here, any little mistake will pop and we instantly feel that something is wrong here. For example, this face may seem more friendly and real than this, right? Even if we reach photorealism, there are still things we need to look at, like animation, especially facial animation, physics, simulations and so on. And what if we finally reach it? Photorealistic renders and characters, you won't be able to tell if they're real or not. I think sooner or later this will happen. And what do you think will come next? Well, people often want what they don't have. If photorealism becomes a mainstream, if any cheap device will be able to render ultra-realistic graphics, it will no longer be special, right?
When everyone's super, no one will be.
We now desire photorealism in CGI because it's still a challenge, but things will change in the future. Imagine if we could just instantly add virtual actors to live-action films and they would look so real you wouldn't tell the difference. This will surely be great for VFX, even some presentations, and video games will basically look like movies. But I wouldn't be so surprised if retro-looking games will be on the rise. I think you know what I mean. People may want to play video games that look like older video games they played when they were younger. Games that are different than our world and imperfect in some ways. If you are a creator and you make video games or animations in a photorealistic style, you're bound to replicate the real-world characteristics in order to make it believable. In other words, you need to follow some rules. From this perspective, your artistic freedom is limited. I'm not saying photorealism is bad, but one of the biggest advantages that non-realistic graphics, stylized graphics and mainly 2D can offer is the fact these visuals may never age so badly. If you look at some old hand-drawn animations, it still looks cool, doesn't it? But for example, look at the first Toy Story. It came out in 1995, but we can see now the technology that's been used here is clearly outdated. If you found some old anime-looking PS2 game, for example, I would bet it still looks so much better nowadays than some old 3D open-world game. Alright, no one really knows what will happen. I can't imagine Call of Duty or Battlefield having stylized visuals. Maybe it would look like Borderlands, whatever. Photorealistic real-time graphic will surely influence how we perceive video games and animations, but I just wanted to say that realism in CGI will not be so special anymore, and maybe the creators will try to bring back that nostalgia feel, so that future generations will know how it felt to play games when the graphics were still evolving and the renders were imperfect. Of course, to a certain point, this is already happening. We can see low-poly simplified renders are on the rise, but I think this will be even more prevalent and valuable in future. So what do you think? What will happen? Just leave a comment down below and please consider subscribing if you haven't already done so. Yeah, this was a little bit different video, but I hope you enjoyed it anyway, and see you next time.